Hey guys, this is the WalterFootball.com After Dark show for February 28th, 2024. We're doing a special episode tonight. It's early, as you can see. We usually go live at 10:30, but it is almost 9 o'clock. And we're doing that because we have a 2024 NFL mock draft, a 3-man version that we do a few times a year. I'm excited to do this. It's always a fun time. Joined, as always, by Jacob Camenker from the Sporting News. Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be on after 1 week off of our podcast, our typical post-Super Bowl break, and getting ready to dive into draft season and free agency. And man, I always look forward to this first 3-man mock that we do here. I always learned so much from both you and Charlie Campbell, who's with us tonight. So looking forward to this and really kickstarting draft season.
Yeah, our special guest tonight, Charlie Campbell, senior NFL draft analyst of WalterFootball.com, the most accurate NFL draft analyst on the planet, the most accurate mock drafter, most accurate everything. Charlie, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks. Great to be with you guys. It's exciting being back here in Indianapolis for another combine, and we got some great stuff in the works. So keep checking back to Walter Football this week. So we got a ton of inside stuff that I'm working on with team people, and so we'll have some really great reports going up.
Yeah, we already have some reports up. Charlie's in Indianapolis, as he just said. So we're gonna have a ton from the combine this year, as usual. So yeah, I'm excited for all the content. I'm excited for this mock draft as well. Before we get to it, please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video. Visit the link in the description for the merch store. All that would help us out a lot. Also, if you really want to help us out, we have super chats. I do the spiel all the time, so Jacob's heard it a million times. Charlie has not. Back in the day, actually, Charlie and I are about the same age, so Charlie may remember this. When we were in high school, McDonald's cheeseburgers were like 60 cents. Now they are like $3, and that means that on one episode of Walter Football, based on the YouTube ads that pay out, we cannot even afford one cheeseburger. So please consider giving us super chats so we can afford some McDonald's cheeseburgers here, because they've gone up in price, and YouTube ads pay absolutely nothing. So we really appreciate the super chats. We get some of them every week, and it really helps us out. It really keeps the show going. So any help you guys want to give us, we'd really appreciate it. If you want to leave a comment, we're going to get to it at the end of the show, because I don't want to disrupt the flow of the mock draft. However, a super chat we will stop for, so maybe that's some incentive for you guys to do that. So we're going to do as we usually do. If you're new to this, we'll go in order here. So I'll start number 1, Jacob will go 2, Charlie 3, and then I'll do 4, etc. And then we'll go through the first round, and then I'll make some joke about going to round 2, and we will not go to round 2. But all right, so as you can see on the screen, if you're listening, you may not see this, but if you're watching on YouTube, you see on the screen, I have already put in Caleb Williams to the Bears. So I kind of selfishly wanted to do that, because we're going to do that instead of the ticker at the bottom here. So you can actually make a mock draft on WalterFootball.com. If you go to this link here, debacle.walterfootball.com, you can make your own mock draft, which you're doing here. So I'm going Caleb Williams, not necessarily to the Bears. I think the Bears are going to trade out in some sort of fashion. Don't know. Well, I think they're going to trade. Sorry, they're going to trade Justin Fields, and then they're going to draft Caleb Williams. Or maybe they'll keep Fields, but I really do think that they're going to trade Fields and draft Caleb Williams. So either way, Caleb Williams to the Bears or someone else. So he's the number 1 pick. Charlie, you're on the clock at number 2 for the Redskins.
So for Washington, I think it's, it comes down to Jaden Daniels from LSU or Drake May from UNC. And I think it is early to know which direction they're leaning, especially with the coaching change there, and Cliff Kingsbury, their new OC, only being in the building a few weeks now. So this definitely could change in the months to come here before the draft. But right now I have them taking Jaden Daniels. I think he'd be a better fit for Cliff Kingsbury between him and May. But that's still up in the air, and a lot of that will be determined in their meetings and pre-draft visits and everything, and how well they mesh together. So, but definitely I think Washington takes one of those 2 quarterbacks, assuming the Bears take Williams.
Yeah, and I think we're going to go 1, 2, 3 at the quarterback position. That hasn't happened often in NFL history. I think actually the first time it ever happened was the Trey Lance draft, during which it went Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance at number 3. The Patriots in this case get Drake May, and that's a consolation prize that I think they would happily take as number 3 out of the top 3 quarterbacks. May was a solid starter at UNC. He has all the tools needed to be a quality NFL level quarterback. And I know there are some people who will look at his like footwork and mechanics and say that needs some work for the next level, but he has arm talent, he has mobility, he has size. You'll look at him maybe as like a Justin Herbert type if things can come together. So I think the Patriots, knowing that Mac Jones needs a change of scenery and probably will not be on the team next year, or if he is, he's going to be a backup. I think that they'll be happy to get Drake May, maybe pair him with a veteran. If he needs a year to develop, maybe they go out and sign old friend Jacoby Brissett to keep them afloat until then. But either way, I think Drake May at number 3 for the Patriots if the board falls like this. And hey, if Washington goes with Drake May, then Jaden Daniels probably go to the Patriots. But Walt, you're up with the 4th pick of the Cardinals.
Yeah, this is not going to be quarterback. The Cardinals are stuck with Kyler Murray. They even tweeted it out. They're like, he's our quarterback. It's like, okay, sure, if you say so. But, I mean, they're kind of stuck with him with the contract. Maybe they go after a quarterback next offseason once it's going to be more financially reasonable to get rid of him. And we'll see if he lasts the whole season. He has not played a whole year. And I think they address tackle later in the draft, maybe even at number 27. The pick they have from Houston. Here, though, I mean, I've gone with this guy to the Cardinals the entire time. I can't remember a mock draft without Marvin Harrison Jr. going to the Cardinals. He fits like. He fits a huge need for them. They have nothing at receiver. Marquise Brown's gonna be free agent, so they Michael Wilson's okay. Greg Dortch is okay. They need a number 1 receiver with Hopkins gone and Brown soon after probably. So Marvin Harrison Jr. best non-quarterback in this class. I think if you ask most people, they'll say that. And yeah, Cardinals get the best non-quarterback here at number 4, so it's a good deal for them.
And the Chargers here at pick 5, this is a tough one to me because I could see them going a lot of different directions. Obviously, they're in a big-time cap situation with what they do with their edge rushers, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. Are they going to be able to keep their wide receivers with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams? And they're going to have to trim a lot of money. So I'm torn on which direction to go. But overall, I think what makes the most sense to me is Brock Bowers to the Chargers, because if you look at the depth of this draft, they could get wide receiver and offensive tackle help high in the 2nd round. If you think of their picks as a pair, but obviously there's a big drop off from Brock Bowers to the next tight end. And tight end is a critical piece in the Jim Harbaugh offense. He uses the tight end all the time. So I definitely could see that appeal there. With Keenan Allen aging and the contract and Mike Williams, those guys might not be on the team very long. So Bowers gives them a mismatch receiving weapon for Justin Herbert to help replace one of those guys to go with Quentin Johnston. So, they could go offensive line, but they do have Slater. They gave Trey Pipkins a big contract. So I could see them looking more towards taking a weapon like Bowers to help Herbert.
Yeah, I think that's a good option for the Chargers. I think they're the most interesting pick in the top 10 to me. And I think what they do might ultimately influence what the Giants do, because I think if Malik Neighbors is off the board, the Giants will be kicking themselves a little bit. But with him on the board here, I think that they won't hesitate to get him. The Giants are in a very tough position with Daniel Jones because they gave him that big money deal, and it's hard to get out of that. Now, they could do it if they really needed to, but I think they're more apt to say, hey, we're going to try to build around him one more time, and if this doesn't work out, hey, we can move on from him and take a lesser dead cap hit next year. So I think going with Neighbors here makes a lot of sense. They need a true number 1 receiver. Neighbors has all the skill set that you would look for in a top pass catcher. And I think the idea of having someone with a good combination of route running ability and speed would be ideal for the Giants, as they give Jones a true number 1 weapon. And, they could consider upgrading the offensive line too, but I think they're still going to give Evan Neal one more year to kind of try to prove himself on the right side of the line. So maybe they would think about Joe Alt, but I think Malik Neighbors is the pick for now.
It's a huge blow to the Jalen Hyatt supercharged Rainmaker card I have there, but I think that'd be a great pick for the Giants, and I think the Titans go with whichever one of Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, and Joe Alt, who's not available because they need receiving help, they need offensive line help. They lost Taylor Lewan a couple of off seasons ago now, and they really didn't fill that tackle position last year. They tried to sign Andre Dillard. They signed Andre Dillard. He didn't do a good job. They drafted Peter Skoronski. He's probably going to be a really good tech guard for them for a long time, but they need a left tackle at this point to protect Will Levis or whichever quarterback they want to go with in the future. They can't pass protect at all. Like Will Levis late in the year when he had a great first game against Atlanta, and then just progressively got worse because he just didn't have the protection. I remember the Tampa game, like he was on his back like almost every other play, and he just had no chance. So the Titans need to give him a chance, and they'll do that with Joe Alt, who's probably the number one tackle right now in this class, but things could change.
And next up, we have the Falcons at 8. And with the top 3 quarterbacks off the board, I think Atlanta, just knowing their front office under Terry Fontenot, this is a team that drafts premium talent. When you think of Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, their 3 first-round picks they've made, all of those guys have some freakish skill sets and are playmakers. And with the quarterbacks gone, I think they look to edge rusher and Dallas Turner. And I think you'll see here at the Combine, he could end up being one of the stars. And they definitely need young talent on the defensive line. It's been a weakness for them for years now. They kind of patchworked it some with Calais Campbell and other guys, but I think they really if they can't trade up for one of the top 3 quarterbacks, I think they look to take Dallas Turner at 8, and then potentially, might have to fill quarterback and free agency. Obviously, that's the big question there in Atlanta. But I don't think they have any hope unless the Bears are willing to trade out. I think they have no hope of getting into the top 3 for one of those quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Charlie. I think the Falcons are probably going to look for a veteran starter, and I could maybe see them going for Michael Penix in the second round. I think in terms of team fit, Michael Penix in Atlanta, where there's a good offensive line, weapons established, that would be best case scenario for him. So personally, I would like to see that, and I love the Dallas Turner pick. The Bears are on the clock again at number 9 here, and obviously they got Caleb Williams with the first pick. Why not pair him with a weapon here in Rome Odunze? Odunze has been rising in the lead up to the NFL draft. There's been some talk about him and Malik Neighbors, which one will go first. I think Odunze is going to go third among the receivers, but he is, I believe, planning to work out at the Combine, and both Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. are not. So if Odunze runs faster than expected or looks great in the on-field drills, I think he could rise. I don't know that he'll go much higher than this number 9 slot, but this is a guy who last year had 1,640 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns. He's seen his production increase every single year that he was in college at Washington. And I think he's just a rock-solid player. He's got good size. Is there some concern about his separation skills? Maybe, but he's still a good contested catch guy. And again, if he runs faster than expected at the Combine, I think that would go a long way towards installing him as a really great option for the Bears here, because pairing him with DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and Caleb Williams, all of a sudden that offense would look really, really good.
Yeah, it looked like a great offense. The Jets need to take a step in that direction as well, because last year their offense was so dreadful. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers being out was a huge factor, but honestly, if Rodgers stayed healthy, maybe they would have snuck into the playoffs, but they wouldn't have done much there because their pass protection was so bad. I think they have to go offensive line here. I'm going Olu Fashanu, the tackle from Penn State, who's kind of fits what Joe Douglas likes to do. He likes to take the kind of like really athletic players, and I think for someone at his size, I think Fashanu is a pretty good athlete. So I think it's a good fit for the Jets, who really need to, like I said, pass protection was so brutal for Zach Wilson. And I know that Zach Wilson is not the best quarterback in the world, although compared to Jacob, what was that guy's name? I can't remember.
Oh, Tim Boyle. Tim Boyle.
That's right. We had some fun fading Tim Boyle. Zach Wilson looked like Dan Marino compared to Tim Boyle. However, Zach Wilson was still terrible last year, but a lot of that was the poor pass protection. So I don't think Zach Wilson necessarily is a lost cause because he's never had good pass protection with the Jets. But, I think that, Aaron Rodgers really needs the help. And even if they trade for David Bakhtiari or acquire him in some sort of fashion, I still think they go tackle here. I think they need to make at least 2 moves on the offensive line and get a number 2 receiver. So Olu Fashanu, best player, I think, who fits a need for the Jets here.
And with the Vikings at pick 11, this is a tough one for me because they have so many needs on their defense. So it really is going to come down to kind of how they grade their players defensively, whether it's Byron Murphy, Leatu Latu, or Jared Verse, or Terrion Arnold. And but among those, I think Byron Murphy makes the most sense for Minnesota. He's legit worthy top 20 player. He plays on the inside of the defensive line, which is a huge need for them. And really, I think from a value perspective, they're going to be able to come away with potentially a decent edge rusher, decent cornerback, or other defensive help in the second round. But I think there'll be a bigger drop off from Murphy than, say, if they took a cornerback here like Terrion Arnold, and then they're potentially a cornerback in the second round. Wouldn't be as big of a drop off compared to Murphy in the interior D line there. So I think Murphy to the Vikings.
Yeah, and I like that pick too because it also corners the market on the Vikings having Byron Murphy players on their defense because they have starting cornerback Byron Murphy Jr., adding Byron Murphy, the second defensive tackle from Texas. That's got good mojo in my opinion. So that is good news. It also sets up the Broncos for an interesting scenario here at 12. I think that if you look at this team, what they probably need, they obviously need a quarterback, but they could also go for a cornerback here to go across from Patrick Surtain and upgrade the defense. But with J.J. McCarthy still on the board, I think that the Broncos might pull the trigger on him. Now, I've said before that I'm not the biggest J.J. McCarthy guy in the world. I'm wondering just how his game is going to translate, but I think he has a big chance to prove himself at the combine. He has a lot of tools. He has good mobility, good athleticism, and he has a solid arm. If he can showcase that his arm's better than people expect and really perform well at the combine, I think that's going to get NFL teams more excited about him. I think they're already a little more excited than the average fan is about him because of these tantalizing tools and the fact that Michigan didn't have a lot of great receiving weapons, so maybe he's going to be a better fit with an NFL team like the Broncos that has guys like Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy available to him early in his career. And I think pairing him with Sean Payton is a good move because Payton can kind of coax that potential out of him, maybe turn him into a Drew Brees type of player. He'll need to improve his accuracy and decision-making for that to happen, but I like J.J. McCarthy's fit here, so I could definitely see him being the pick if the Broncos like him enough as they move on from Russell Wilson.
I'm not the biggest McCarthy guy either. In fact, I'm in the second round of my mock draft, and people are so angry about that. Like every time I post a link to my mock draft on Twitter or I guess X, they're like, "How can you have McCarthy in the second round? Like, how dare you?" And I'm like, "Well, Will Levis went to the second round last year, and everyone thought he was going to be in the top 10. So you never know with these quarterbacks; they could fall." What do you say, Charlie?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, McCarthy and Bo Nix, I think it's really fluid right now. And free agency could, if a few of these teams sign veterans, then, that could take away a few spots. And we're wondering which guy is going to fall like Levis between McCarthy and Nix easily. So wouldn't shock me at all if they end up going lower than expected right now.
Yeah. So with that in mind, Raiders, they have a chance to go for a quarterback here. Obviously, they have a huge need at the position. Jimmy Garoppolo got suspended for 2 games for performance-enhancing drugs. I don't know how that worked because he was absolutely terrible last year. So I can't imagine how he would have been without those PEDs. And then Aiden O'Connell, he did okay at times. Mostly, he did great in that Thursday night game they had against the Chargers. But he had some really bad moments as well. But you can look to the offensive line, I think, for that. Now, I'm not saying Aiden O'Connell is the franchise quarterback. In fact, I think the Raiders take a quarterback in the second round unless they, trade for a Justin Fields or something like that. I think they're going to be just out of a quarterback at number 13. And I think back to last year when they had the 7th pick, it sounded like they really wanted Paris Johnson. However, Arizona traded up from they went from 3 to 12, and then they went from 12 to 6. They sniped Paris Johnson. The Raiders took Tyree Wilson because of that, but it sounded like the Raiders are going to take Johnson to really improve their offensive line, which needs a lot of help. It feels like I'm mocking all these offensive linemen here to these teams, the Titans, the Jets, and now the Raiders are going to take J.C. Latham, the tackle from Alabama. I mean, really, any offensive lineman here makes sense for the Raiders. They only have Colton Miller at left tackle. They have huge needs everywhere else on the offensive line. And, I think depending on what they do at quarterback, maybe if they take one in the second round, it still might be O'Connell who starts at the beginning of next year. And I think he's going to play a lot better with improved protection if they improve it. But otherwise, if it's a rookie under center eventually, or even week 1, they need to make sure that quarterback's really protected. So in an offensive line rich class, like they almost certainly have to go offensive line here.
And with the Saints at 14, this is a tough one because they could go a lot of directions with this pick. They need a receiver to go with Chris Olave. They need offensive line help. Penning has disappointed thus far. Andres Pete's a free agent. And then cornerback is a big issue if they end up trading Marshawn Lattimore, which is rumors they're going to do, and they reworked his contract to make him more available to other teams, and they're way over the cap, so they have to trim. So with all that being the case, though, I think offensive line is probably the direction they go. Mickey Loomis has had a strong inclination to draft offensive linemen in the first round. When you think of Pete and Ryan Ramczyk and Cesar Ruiz, and McCoy was a second round pick. So I could see them continuing that trend, and I'm going to have them go with Troy Fatanu, the left tackle from Washington. He could stay at left tackle, although he's undersized for that in the NFL, or he could slide inside to guard. So it gives them options and flexibility there, but with his versatility, and he's really, really good athlete on the edge, and I could see that having an appeal to the Saints.
Yeah, I could see them going O-line too. It makes a lot of sense for them. The Colts, I had trouble with this pick. I always seem to have trouble with the Colts because they're always picking in the middle of the Browns, and you don't know who's going to be on the board here. But I kind of narrowed this down to a couple of key areas of need at receiver or cornerback. And my thought at receiver is I'd be surprised, maybe not shocked if they let Michael Pittman Jr. go, but I'd be kind of surprised if they did just because they're building around Anthony Richardson. So I think they find a way to keep him and have Josh down. So I don't think they'll need receiver that badly. So I think they're going to break the seal on cornerbacks here because they need someone to go with. Juju Brents long-term. Kenny Moore is a free agent. And, Isaiah Rodgers, shout out UMass, is on the Eagles now and is still suspended after his gambling issue with the NFL. So I think Terrion Arnold from Alabama is the top cornerback in this draft class right now. I think you could probably say Nate Wiggins from Clemson might end up being the option here too. It's a pick your poison type of cornerback class. There's a lot of talented guys there, but it's just a matter of who you prefer the most. And I think Arnold probably ends up being the first one off the board. I really liked watching him play at Alabama. I thought he had good instincts. So I'll give him to the Colts here. And, wouldn't surprise me at all if they go with a different corner, but I think that's firmly on the table for them at 15.
Yeah, so now we get to the Seahawks at 16, and Jacob, you were talking about how you had trouble mocking to the Colts. I've had trouble mocking to the Seahawks because it seems like every year they take like a third-round pick in the first round. Obviously, an exception last year was Devon Witherspoon at number 5, and that was even tough to predict because the Seahawks are notorious for drafting third, fourth, fifth-round quarterbacks who really pan out. Think Richard Sherman, et cetera. But they suddenly took a corner at number 5, and that just kind of came out of nowhere. So it's tough to predict here. In my mock draft, I have them taking Chris Jenkins, the defensive tackle from Michigan. last year, everyone had thought they're going to take Jalen Carter, and they didn't. Maybe they have regrets there after Jalen Carter was so great. Now, Devon Witherspoon was terrific as well. However, they even traded for Leonard Williams during the year. Leonard Williams is free agent, so if he leaves, I think the Seahawks almost have to replace him and then draft a defensive tackle that everyone thought they were going to take in the first round last year. So Chris Jenkins, you could argue, best defensive tackle available, maybe one of the best defensive players available. I think there are some other defensive players that I've ranked higher than Jenkins, but like I said, Seattle kind of notorious for not taking the best player available. Like they have a very unique draft board there, and Jenkins might fit what they're looking for.
Yeah, they're always tough to predict. At 17, the Jaguars, we had a report from Senior Bowl talking about kind of their thought process in the first round. Big wide receiver is in play for them. Cornerback is in play as well. And just given the the way this mock has unfolded, I think it would make more sense to take the cornerback because there's more depth at receiver for the second round. So I think given the players available, I'd have them go with Nate Wiggins, the cornerback from Clemson. As Jacob said, it is kind of a pick your poison cornerback class. There isn't a Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley Jr. All these guys kind of have some flaws. There's a little lack of twitch with Terry and Arnold. Nate Wiggins, there's a little lack of physicality and tackling, but he's the best pure cover corner in terms of just being a fast, fluid athlete that can run the route and prevent separation. And with them having to go against CJ Stroud and the Texans' young receivers for years to come, I could definitely see them emphasizing adding some help at the cornerback position, which was a weakness last year. So Nate Wiggins to Jacksonville.
Yeah, and I think that ironically is very similar to the 17th pick last year where the Patriots landed Christian Gonzalez, who had similar questions about physicality and toughness, but ended up being excellent when he was on the field as a rookie. I have the Bengals at 18 here. I'm going to continue taking offensive linemen off the board because I haven't done enough of that so far in this O-line rich draft. And look, Jonah Williams, free agent. He's had trouble giving up sacks in years past. I think he was a little better on the right side this year, but I think the Bengals can afford to go with someone like Amarius Mims at right tackle, just a guy with an amazing athletic ceiling who could end up being a star for them across from Orlando Brown. They have to keep Joe Burrow healthy. We saw last year Jake Browning did really well in relief of him, but their Super Bowl hopes are really tied to Joe Burrow staying healthy throughout a full season, which we haven't seen him really do except for the one time they made the Super Bowl run. So I think if they shore up offensive tackle here, that offense looks pretty good, minus the fact that literally all of their tight ends are free agents, which I'm just seeing now and is shocking to look at. But I think that Mims fits kind of the draft range, fits the need for the Bengals. And yeah, they can go with the defensive tackle here. They can continue to add to their secondary, but I think they know that their priority needs to be keeping Joe Burrow clean moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm not taking a lineman here for the first time in a while. So going with the Rams pick at number 19, going with a cornerback here for the first time for me. Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo, I think could. He could be the first cornerback off the board. Like we were saying, it could be any one of like 3 or 4 cornerbacks. The Rams lost Jalen Ramsey recently. And while their cornerback play last year was not terrible, they still need to shore up that area. Think about who they play each year. They play the Niners twice. They have to deal with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. They play the Seahawks twice. They have to deal with DK Metcalf. Maybe not so much Tyler Lockett in the future, but they have Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. And then if the Cardinals get Marvin Harrison Jr., suddenly there's so many good receivers in that division that the Rams need to make sure they have the cornerbacks to contend with those players. So Rams, Quinion Mitchell, really any cornerback would make sense for them. Maybe they'll like Mitchell's upside. He's a bit raw, but he has huge upside and could end up being the top cornerback in this class.
At 20, I have the Steelers taking, with the way this mock has unfolded, I think right tackle slash guard could be a consideration, and Talise Fuaga from Oregon State. Obviously, the offense was just pitiful for Pittsburgh for a lot of last season. Improved late in the year, but they still need more help on that offensive line. And Fuaga, I think, is a nice pick because there's flexibility there for him to play right tackle or guard. He's going to be strong and a good blocker for Najee Harris to run behind. And Fuaga might not, in talking with some team guys, he might not have the ceiling of a Marius Mims or like a Tyler Guyton, but they view him as safer in some ways. So they think that he's just going to be a solid starting right tackle or guard in the NFL. So I could see the Steelers continuing to beef up that offensive line and taking him.
Yeah, that's a sensible pick. I like that a lot. And the Dolphins are going to make a similar move here. I have them not going with a tackle, but going with a center in really everyman and Graham Barton from Duke. Barton, I think, played tackle in college, but is probably going to move to the interior as a pro. But he has high-end versatility, and that's something that the Dolphins could use here because I'm looking at what they have on their roster right now. Their starting interior offensive line, Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams, and Robert Hunt are all free agents. Mike McDaniel was talking about Teron Armstead still considering retirement earlier. So you're talking about the possibility that Austin Jackson might be the only returning starter on this Dolphins offensive line. That should be very scary to this team, considering how much of their potential offensive success is tied to keeping Tua Tagovailoa healthy. And I know Liam Eichenberg played well in place of Connor Williams last year at center, but I think adding a player like Barton who could play either guard position or maybe play center if Eichenberg is better off at guard or however you see it, I think having someone with that type of high-end versatility would be great for the Dolphins. And with a guy like Fuaga, who, as you mentioned, Charlie, would be a very safe option for the Dolphins off the board, I think Barton makes a lot of sense as just another high-floor plug-and-play starter.
Okay, as it so happens, I get the Eagles at number 22. And I think if this player is on the board, the Eagles just rush up to just rush in their card and announce this player, Kamari Lassiter, the cornerback from Georgia. You may ask why. Well, a couple of reasons. One, first of all, they need a cornerback. Like, they have nothing at corner last year. They made Sam Howell look like Joe Montana, like in those two matchups. Like, everyone remembers those two games. So like they went back and forth, and then everyone thought that the Cowboys Redskins games are going to be the same. And then Howell was pretty terrible in those games because, there's a big difference between the Eagles secondary and the Cowboys secondary. The Eagles made every quarterback look great. Including Baker Mayfield in the first round of the playoffs. So they really need to make sure that they shore up their secondary. And Vic Fangio is going to help a lot, but they need talent there. Their two cornerbacks last year, Slay and Bradbury, they dealt with injuries, but they're also old, and they really declined very quickly. So they need help here. Second reason why this pick makes a lot of sense is because this last word here, Georgia. The Eagles love taking their Georgia players. In fact, in my mock draft, every single player I have to the Eagles in the first 4 rounds are Georgia players. Not to say that they're only going to draft Georgia players, but I'm just hedging my bets here. So Kamari Lassiter, cornerback from Georgia, they continue the Georgia tradition. I'm not sure why they only draft Georgia players, but I feel like the trend's just going to continue.
Well, next up with Houston. This is a tough one for me. I struggle with this each week, but I think free agency will have a big impact on it. But I would say Leatu Latu from UCLA would make a lot of sense for the Texans. Give them a productive edge rusher, that high effort player that fits really well with DeMeco Ryans, gives them an edge rusher to go across from Will Anderson. John Grenard's a free agent. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a big market for him. And I could see the Texans looking at some nice edge rush options at 23 between Latu and Jared Verse.
Yeah, Latu makes a lot of sense for the Texans. I think this player makes a lot of sense for the Cowboys. Tyler Guyton. I'm not sure what the plan is for the Cowboys offensive line at left tackle right now. Obviously, they have Tyler Smith, who showed that he can play well there, and they have Tyron Smith there, who's a free agent. But I imagine Jerry Jones and those guys would have an interest in bringing him back. This is more of a future-looking move, though, to get a guy like Guyton in the fold, because Smith is a 33-year-old, Tyron Smith, 33-year-old who has had injury issues at times. And we've seen Tyler Smith have a lot of success at guard. And where Tyler Biadasz is a free agent at center, it might behoove the Cowboys to kind of keep him there and make sure they're not replacing two starters on that offensive line in case Biadasz doesn't come back or they can't keep him. So I think Guyton has that sort of upside that teams look for. They could re-sign Tyler. Oh, my goodness. They're all named Tyler, or Ty. It's driving me insane what I'm doing right now. So we've got Guyton coming in. He could be the swing tackle his first year. Maybe if Tyron Smith has any sort of regression or deals with injuries, then he could see more playing time. But I think this just gives them some future assurances at tackle. And since the Cowboys selected Tyron Smith, they have not been shy about investing capital in O-linemen early. So I think that this would be a fine pick for them at this juncture, though it would make the lives of people trying to figure out who's playing on the left side of the line very difficult, because they all basically have very similar names.
Yeah, they really do. And remember, everyone always said, "Oh, the Cowboys never take offensive linemen in the first round," and it feels like they've done a lot of that since. So it really makes sense for them to do that here. Packers, something that didn't make sense for them last year was trading Rasul Douglas, and I guess at the time you could argue it because they were going through a slump, like they were losing to the Raiders and the Broncos, just embarrassing losses on the road. All the games are close, but still, it was tough sledding here there for the Packers. But they made a late run late in the year, and if they still had Rasul Douglas against the Niners, they may have won that game. And who knows what would happen against Detroit? They beat Detroit on Thanksgiving, and if they beat the Lions in the NFC Championship, suddenly they get the Chiefs in the Super Bowls, which would have been pretty remarkable. But the Packers need to replace Rasul Douglas. I've been doing that here with Cooper DeJean, as cornerback / safety from Iowa. You can play all over the secondary. I feel like the Packers could really use someone like that, especially, having someone to cover Amon-Ra St. Brown. Detroit's their biggest challenger right now in the division, although Chicago is definitely going to be up there. And if Chicago drafts Rome Odunze as Jacob had in this mock draft, they're going to have to worry about DJ Moore and Odunze. So it makes sense for the Packers to go after a defensive back here.
At 26, I'm torn on this because I think if it's really going to depend on what happens in free agency, if the Bucks can get Mike Evans re-signed, and if they do, they're going to be paying between 40 and 50 million to their two starting wide receivers, which is just insane. But I mean, they're trying to make it happen. They're trying to get Baker Mayfield back. So with Shaq Barrett getting cut, I would have the Bucks going with Jared Verse, edge rusher from Florida State. Joe Tryon's been a bit of a disappointment. It just hasn't come on the way he was expected to at this point. Yaya Diaby showed some nice promise last year, so that was a nice mid-round pick for them, but they're going to need more help to go with him. And Verse could be a plug-and-play starter for Tampa Bay.
Yeah, speaking of plug-and-play starters, that's what I have the Cardinals doing at this point. I think they're going to go best player available, and maybe they have bigger needs than center, but I don't know about you guys. I'm not sold on Hjalte Froholt being the long-term starting center for the Cardinals. He wasn't terrible, but he committed 8 penalties last year and allowed 3 sacks, which is a lot for a center. So I think he's more of a backup. So I'm going to give them Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon. I think he's one of those guys that you look at and you say, this guy's going to be a safe interior starter for his entire career. Should be a day one starter, plug and play. Should pair well with Kyler Murray, help keep him better protected up the middle, which, that will be a big asset to him considering his mobility. He can get outside of the pocket and make those guys on the edge have to work. But when he gets pressured up the middle, he has escapability, but it forces him and flushes him to one side, which makes it easier for other guys to come in pursuit. So all that's to say, Powers Johnson, day one starter at center. You kind of figure out what to do with Hjalte Froholt after, and this would give, with Paris Johnson, DJ Humphries, and Powers Johnson here, 3 solid linemen for the Cardinals. So all of a sudden, their offense would look a lot better with him and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, speaking of offenses needing to look better, the Bills they've had a big need at number 2 receiver for a while. It looked like Gabe Davis might be that guy when he had that huge performance against the Chiefs in the second round of the playoffs, and that crazy 13-second game. Sorry, Bills fans, if I had to bring that up. But ever since that game, Gabe Davis just hasn't done much. Like, he's had a couple of great games here and there, including the Miami game, the first Miami game last year. But then he's had so many just 0-1 catch performances overlapping those. In fact, he does very little more often than he does a lot. And so I think the Bills really want some consistency at number 2 receiver, especially given Stephon Diggs' decline late in the year. And I think Stephon Diggs was dealing with an injury that was undisclosed. Well, we won't know that, or we may never know that. But I mean, who knows what we'll know in the near future. But the Bills need help at receiver. That's definitely clear. Going to have them taking Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, a very high upside receiver. I feel like the Bills would love the upside because they also have Josh Allen, who has a huge arm, and maybe you can make something out of Brian Thomas Jr. here. I really think the Bills have to go number 2 receiver here. People said they had to do that last draft too, and they didn't do it. Now I know they drafted Dalton Kincaid, who's really good for them, but as far as finding a second receiver, they haven't done that. So maybe they'll do that here.
And the Lions up at pick 29. I think this would be pretty interesting. So, they have a few routes they could go, but with Kool-Aid McKinstry available, I think he would be the pick for Detroit. Gives them a cornerback with a lot of experience that can compete quickly. He's got great football IQ. He's long, he's fast, can fit as a press man corner, which they do some press. Aaron Glenn runs a really nice defense, mixing up press man, off man, and zone. So McKinstry is a scheme fit. I think the only question will be if they're, convinced about how he does in the interview in terms of loving football and displaying work ethic through the draft process and everything. I think those would be the questions to see if he's a culture fit for Detroit, but obviously cornerback is the biggest need on their roster, and he would be an immediate contributor for them that could challenge to start right away.
Yeah, I know Lions fans will be happy about seeing them get a cornerback because that's one of their biggest weaknesses. So I like that pick a lot. This is my last selection of this one-round mock. I drew the short straw, and by that I mean I definitely know less than these guys at this point, so I purposely took the 3rd pick so I'd have one fewer. The Ravens are on the clock. They have a lot of defensive free agents, if you look at this team, and especially on their edge rush, where Jadeveon Clowney had a really good year, but he's now free agent. So is Kyle Van Noy. So all of a sudden with those 2 guys and Justin Madubuike, who's going to probably be franchise tagged, but you need some extra talent up there. So I think Chop Robinson from Penn State, he makes a lot of sense to me at this point. He's a high upside guy. I think he didn't quite live up to expectations this year. But he's definitely the type of player that could thrive at the next level. And I think getting him into the building with the Ravens coaching staff, I think that's going to make a huge difference for him. And we've seen the Ravens take a chance on Odafe Owe out of Penn State in the past as a guy who, he wasn't a big sack guy, but he had all the athletic potential. I think Robinson, you'll look at and say, hey, the production wasn't as much as we thought this year, but there's still untapped potential there. So I think where they need some pass rush help, I think they will be happy to get him with the 30th pick here.
Yeah, so I had the Niners pick, so this is my final selection as well. Until we get to the second round, no, just kidding. No, the Niners. I see these last 2 teams here, Niners, Chiefs. These teams draft very similarly. They love addressing the trenches. The Niners have done that a lot. Like, think about all the defensive linemen that they drafted over the years. Now, like, defensive linemen is not a huge need for them. However, this is what they do, and they draft for the future. And I think they take a guy with high upside here, but a low floor. So Michael Hall Jr., the defensive tackle from Ohio State. So this guy is super talented. I think that he would unquestionably be a first-round pick if he didn't have off-the-field concerns, and that could drop him to day 2. However, I think the Niners may look at this and say, they took a chance on Chase Young via trade. So they may take a chance on Hall here with this huge upside. If they can get him to play up to his level, they're going to have a potential Pro Bowler here. So this is what the Niners do. They go after defensive linemen, and I think this pick makes sense for them.
And with the final pick of the first round, I have the Chiefs taking Jordan Morgan here, the left tackle from Arizona, which I think is a great fit for Kansas City. Donovan Smith is a free agent, and he isn't very good anyway. They were able to win despite him, not because of him. Jawan Taylor had some struggles in his first year as a big free agent signing, but he wasn't as bad, and his contract's going to lead to him being back probably next year at right tackle anyway. But Jordan Morgan is a really good athlete, really quick and agile on the edge. Really good player to match up against speed rushers. So for protecting the blind side of Pat Mahomes, I think this is a really nice pick for the Chiefs. Morgan lacks a little strength. He was coming off an ACL last year, so perhaps that kept him from really being able to fire off the ball and move guys in the ground game. But the Chiefs aren't a power running team anyway. They're a passing based offense. And why wouldn't they be with Mahomes? So I think Morgan's a great fit there for the Chiefs. Give them a long-term left tackle and kind of stop that turnstile that it's been over the past few years.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it for our mock draft. We have a few questions here. And the first one is from Stone Papa Smurf. He says, if Drake May is not available at 3, he's asking if the Patriots trade back. As it so happens, Charlie posted a hot press on the site, which if you go to waltsfootball.com, you'll see this. Patriots rating the top 3 quarterbacks. Charlie, do you want to talk about this post that you just made?
Yeah, from what I heard from sources there, their top 2 quarterbacks were Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, and then they had May 3rd. But they did feel that all 3 are worthy high first-round picks. They liked all 3. So I don't think they're in that boat of we only want 2, and if we don't get either of those guys, we'll just move back and stockpile picks to hopefully get a quarterback next year. I didn't get that sense at all. I got the sense was they liked Williams and Daniels the most, but they also liked Drake May and weren't all to him as a player. So I think if Daniels and Williams are gone, I think Drake May would be the Patriots pick at 3.
Jacob, I know you live in Patriot land. Any thoughts to that?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I think that the Patriots know they need a quarterback. And look, this front office knows that they have a little bit of rebuilding to do, but they do have a quality defense in place. And this is a good draft for all of the needs that the Patriots have. They're positioned to get one of the top 3 quarterbacks with that 3rd pick. And then this draft is deep with talent at wide receiver and offensive line. So if they really shore up those areas, I almost compare this to the draft that Washington had when they took Robert Griffin and then spent a bunch of picks on offensive linemen. I think they drafted 3 offensive linemen with like 8 picks after that. I think that's the type of draft that they're looking to have. So, yeah, maybe if they weren't sold on all 3 of these guys, they would consider trading down. But I do think that based off what Charlie's saying, they are. And again, it makes sense that they would want to get what looks like a pretty high quality and sure thing at the number 3 pick at quarterback.
Yeah. Stone Papa Smurf also saying if we were looking at offensive tackles from this year's draft and prospects from next year's draft already, would Joe Alt still be number 1? Charlie and I have done some 2025 NFL mock drafts. Charlie, what do you think of this? I know it's very difficult to project outward a year from now. If you look at our mock drafts, if you look back at our 2024 NFL mock draft at this time last year, yeah, there are some similarities. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. would still be up there and stuff like that. And Caleb Williams, for sure. But some players have shuffled in and out. For example, Jaden Daniels is someone I didn't have at all in the first round of my mock draft. So if you had to guess, Charlie, like if you were to group this year's and next year's tackles together, like do you think Joe Alt would still be number one?
Oh man, that's impossible to say at this point. But because next year does have some tackles that I think could turn into really good players and prospects. Guys like Will Campbell at LSU, Ernest Green at Georgia, the Texas kid Calvin Banks, Trey Zune at Texas A&M. I'm not saying those guys are all future first rounders, but they all, I think, are players that could rise and end up being prospects in early round prospects. But I will say it's easier to do that kind of comparison with, the previous year. Mm-hmm. So if you were to say, what if Joe Alt, this version of Joe Alt right now, if he was in last year's draft with Paris Johnson and Darnell Wright, where would he be in that group? And for that, I would say, I think he's kind of right between the two. I think Paris Johnson has a better skill set, more athletic upside. But I think Joe Alt has more a better skill set than, say, Darnell Wright. And they went 6 and 9. So I think he's right in there between those two if you were going to rank them. But it also depends on scheme and team need and stuff. And, Darnell Wright, right tackle, the Bears needed just a good offensive lineman at either spot, just the best available. But say other teams picking high in the first round, they might not want a guy that's a right tackle only. So, for example, like a J.C. Latham, who a lot of teams, is a consensus first rounder and top 20, but a lot of teams don't view him as a guy to move to the left side. They view him like Darnell Wright, where he's a right tackle. Fashanu at Penn State is viewed, and Alt are viewed as guys that could start at right or left tackle. Mims is viewed to have that kind of skill set where he could start at right or left tackle. And then Fuaga, they look at as right tackle or guard. Fatanu, guard or left tackle. So it really varies. But overall, I would say Joe Alt is a legit top 10 caliber offensive tackle in just about any draft class.
Last question here from Stone Papa Smurf. Is there any chance of the Bengals giving up Jake Browning? He should start. Now, he was pretty impressive late last year. Not a lot of experience, not a lot of starts, but he did look like he could handle a starting job somewhere. Well, Jacob, I mean, you and I handicapped the Bengals a lot last year, and we were fans of Jake Browning. In fact, we took the Bengals for a huge play against the Jaguars on Monday Night Football, and Browning was excellent in that game. Do you think any team would trade for Browning? And then once you're done, Charlie, have you heard any buzz about any teams being interested in Browning who may not get one of the top 3 quarterbacks?
I think if the Bengals could get a solid enough pick for Browning and knew that they had a quality veteran like in the Jacoby Brissett mold available to sign in free agency, I think they would consider doing it because, Browning's young, but his timeline to start is going to interfere with Joe Burrow's, and obviously they're going to take Burrow over him 10 times out of 10. But I'm not sure that the market for Browning will materialize. I'd say the team to watch would be the Titans because Brian Callahan went over there from Cincinnati. He's worked with Browning before. And, Will Levis is no sure thing, but it doesn't seem like the Titans want to invest high-end draft capital in another quarterback. So maybe if they could get Browning for some sort of conditional mid-round pick from the Bengals, maybe they consider doing that and having him and Malik Willis and Will Levis all compete for playing time. But aside from that team, I don't know that there's going to be a ton of interest in Browning. So I think that the Bengals probably end up keeping him at least for this season. Maybe in the future, Browning will get an opportunity to prove himself, though.
Yeah, I haven't heard team people talk about him as a trade target. But that's also something that I think could could come about if teams are playing musical chairs and they're left without. And then now that becomes an option that they're interested in. But right now, I haven't heard that buzz. And I think for Cincinnati's standpoint, having a quality backup quarterback is a valuable commodity, especially when it's a player that's paid as little as Browning is. So, if you sign a veteran like, say, a Jacoby Brissett or just some Brian Hoyer, even, to some guy that kind of ilk, you end up having to pay them a lot more than what you pay a player like Browning. So I think that's even though it's a nice idea for Cincinnati to get some draft capital. If Joe Burrow were to go down for a month of the season, you want your backup quarterback you hope that he can get you to 2-2 in that month to get your starter back. No team in the NFL is really 100% prepared for their starter to, say, blow his ACL in a preseason game or training camp practice and then still compete to go to the Super Bowl. There's just generally, there have been backup quarterbacks to go to the Super Bowl and win, but that's just such a long shot that you can't bank on. So you just want a quarterback that can withstand a month of injury to help keep the ship going. And so I don't see the Bengals just giving Browning away. I think they would want something quality for him, and I'm not sure there's that market just yet.
Yeah, you brought teams to do that. Like, it's very rare. The Eagles did that in 2017 when Carson Wentz went down and Nick Foles took over. But also the following year, the Eagles could have traded Nick Foles away. It might have been difficult, but they didn't do that. And Foles came back. And the Eagles didn't really know what Carson Wentz's condition would be like. And Wentz started, I believe, week 3 and onward. But then he got hurt again, and Nick Foles took over, and he quarterbacked the Eagles in the playoffs. And if Alshon Jeffrey then dropped the pass on the final drive of that game, the Eagles may have won that game and gone to the NFC Championship, beating the Saints. So they would have played the Rams, and they had the Rams number back then. So the Eagles potentially could have gone to the Super Bowl twice with Foles. So yeah, it's just so important to have a reliable backup quarterback for a team that's contending. Now, a team that has no chance, like I think the Redskins made this mistake last year, where they had Sam Howell and they brought him Jacoby Brissett. But Brissett just rotted on the bench, and he came in for a couple games at the end. But it really made no sense for him to be there. But the Bengals are a team with Super Bowl aspirations. So if they improve their offensive line, and like Charlie said, if Browning gets to come in for a month or a month and a half, he could steady the ship until Burrow comes back. But who knows? If they have a great offensive line, maybe you can pull off what Nick Foles did. It's definitely possible. Woolen was a nice pick. Yeah, we're talking about Seattle drafting mid-round cornerbacks: Richard Sherman, Tariq Woolen, Shaq Griffin, another one. They've had so many mid-round cornerbacks. It was just so shocking to see them draft Devon Witherspoon last year, number 5. Now, and then ended up being a good pick. He was great for them. But given their strength of drafting mid-round cornerbacks, it was very shocking. Charlie, did you was that a surprise to you as well? I can't remember our conversations about that last year, but to me, I was like,
I was surprised. Yeah. There was some late buzz about them potentially taking Witherspoon and that they really liked him. And I texted people we know there, and right before the draft, sometimes people can clam up and, they get nervous about someone jumping them for their player. And the response I got at the time was, it's possible for them to take Witherspoon. But at the same time, we heard that they also were very high on Jalen Carter. They had a need on the inside of the defensive line, and he made a lot of sense there. I know they, were here a year ago at Indianapolis. I was talking with some Seattle people, and some others came in, and they were asking how the interview with Jalen Carter went. And then the next day he flew back to Georgia to get booked and arrested. So it was kind of a very crazy turn of events. But But yeah, that pick was a surprise. I thought that, they would kind of emphasize the defensive line because, like Walt said, they've had such done such a good job of scouting and drafting players for the secondary in the mid rounds. So, based on their track record, it kind of made more sense that they would take the defensive tackle over a corner at 5.
Okay. Yeah, so it says if only the Seahawks will take Walt's advice here. Yeah, it'll be nice to get a Seahawks pick correct in the mock draft. That'd be great. Steelers got to go center. I believe who had the Steelers pick? I forget.
I did. I have Fuaga.
Okay. Any chance to go center? I mean, they just cut Mason Cole, so I feel like center is a possibility, but they don't have to go center in the first round. You can get a center on day 2.
Yeah, exactly. They could take a guy like Zach Frazier on day 2. And come away with a player that could be a solid center for them. They also could potentially sign someone else in free agency. But yeah, I think that where they're picking, they're going to have some really nice tackle options available to them at the end of the top 20. So, if you draft a tackle, then you can move Dan Moore Jr. inside to guard and really, help strengthen that line at 2 different places.
Yeah, for sure. Stone Papa Smurf said, I made money on you guys' Super Bowl betting show. I took your advice on the Ayuk unders in Kansas City money line. So yeah, Jacob and I think we hit we hit most of our props. A couple misses here and there, but for the most part, we got those bets correct. Getting Ayuk under was nice. So congrats on the win. Hope you had the Pelicans tonight as well. We've been on a tear in the NBA. So we have the Pelicans -4 tonight. So we have NBA picks on the site. We have PGA picks as well. So you check that out at waltsoffootball.com. A couple more questions here. Slew asking likeliest teams to either trade up or trade down in the first round, or just too early yet to say with free agency yet to start. I mean, yeah, a lot can change, right? Well, first of all, we have the combine coming up very shortly, and then we have free agency. Teams could fill needs. I imagine that there are several teams that would love to move up into the top 3 to get a quarterback. I just think it's going to be very difficult to do that because those 3 teams are they need quarterbacks, or if the Bears trade Justin Fields, they will. Those teams are likely to take quarterbacks. So I don't think the Cardinals are trading out of 4 because they love Marvin Harrison Jr. I guess the first team that could trade out is 5 with the Chargers, but I don't know who's trading up. Like who's trading up to number 5? No one's going to trade up for Bo Nix or JJ McCarthy. I can imagine. But yeah, like I said, a lot can change from the combine. So do you guys have any opinion on this? We can go in order here, Charlie and then Jacob.
Well, I would say, we'll see, how the combine and free agency quarterback market shakes out. But if Denver or the Raiders were to fall in love with JJ McCarthy and the Falcons haven't added a starter in free agency, then maybe, say, Sean Payton or the Raiders would get antsy and want to jump in front of Atlanta to get him. But, that's still a bit too early to say. Otherwise, I think, consider potentially the Giants and Washington as teams that could be candidates to trade back into the first round because they both have some extra ammo there on day 2. Detroit as well. I think Brad Holmes, we've seen him be very aggressive, did a big trade up for Jameson Williams 2 years ago. Last year, he moves down and takes Jahmyr Gibbs. He moved up in the second round to get Brian Branch. So he's an aggressive GM to move up and down the board, and they have an extra 3rd round pick from the TJ Hawkinson trade. So that would be a team that I think could be a candidate that might move up or down. Move up considering they're already at 29. And then of course you always got to put the Eagles in there with Howie Roseman. That's just a given. So he's always, front and center for candidates wheeling and dealing in the draft.
Yeah, and I'll say I agree with you, Walt, that I think the Chargers among those teams picking early are probably the most likely to trade down just because, as Charlie mentioned, there are a lot of players that they could target, and Brock Bowers looks like an excellent fit for them. But if they like 5 to 6 guys, but someone else is in love with Malik Neighbors or Joe Alt and is willing to move up from, say, the 9 to 12 range up into number 5 to get Alt or Neighbors or someone of that ilk, I could see a trade happening. I agree with you too, Charlie. The JJ McCarthy, if his stock catches fire, teams might be willing to trade up for him just to lock in that they get him. But I'm kind of more apt to believe that he'll go in kind of we'll call it the late lottery section. I know this isn't the NBA, but that's the better way to term it, from like somewhere between 10 and 20 if he goes in the first round and, has a wide draft range. So I'm interested to see what happens. The combine should inform a lot of this. And, once we know where the quarterbacks are after free agency, we'll know better which teams are the bigger threat to go out and get guys too.
So real quick before we move on, I think if I were to bet, I would say the first trade to happen outside, not including, if the Bears do something, like I said, I think it's likely they trade Fields, but who knows? Outside of that, I think the first trade to occur is going to be 10. I think I think the Jets need a tackle. Like I said, I'm drafting Olu Fashanu, but they don't have that many picks from the Aaron Rodgers trade. And they need a tackle. But so if they like 3 or 4 of the tackles on the board, I think it makes sense for them to move down. And if one of those teams that we're talking about, like Charlie mentioned, wanting JJ McCarthy or Bo Nix or whoever, maybe they move to 10, and the Jets move down a few spots, pick up some picks, and then draft a tackle that they easily could have taken at 10. So that is my best guess as to what happens first. But yeah, like we said, a lot can change for sure. Last question here. The football therapist asking any insight on if the Giants are linked to the top quarterback. Some interesting buzz today. So I think the story he's referring to is that the Giants were really they're really interested in drafting a quarterback if one lands to them. Obviously they have Daniel Jones, who struggled last year, but didn't really have much help from the offensive line, which has been kind of a running theme for his tenure with the Giants. Like, honestly, if the Giants just take another quarterback here, it's going to be the same issues. Like, I think they'll have better success, a little bit better success with Jones, than Jones, I should say. But they don't have the protection anyway. So they're kind of be spinning their wheels. I feel like they need to improve their offensive line. If they were drafting in the top 3, they should definitely take a quarterback because it would be a huge upgrade. But assuming they can't move into the top 3, which I can't see happening. I think going with McCarthy or Nix would be a huge mistake. It would just be repeating what they did in 2019 with Jones. I think they have to go offensive lineman or receiver, and then improve their offensive line and receiving core, and then get a quarterback somehow. I just think like I said, it would be a huge mistake. So what do you guys think? Let's go in order again.
Yeah, I just think that they're kind of SOL along with Atlanta and say the Broncos or Raiders, any of these teams that want a top 3 quarterback. I think just the way it came about with the way these teams finished. And the only hope is the Bears being open to trading and sticking with Fields. And right now, I think that's probably, 60-40, they take Caleb Williams and trade Fields, or maybe even more than that, maybe more like 70-30 to 80-20, that they trade Fields and draft a new one. So I think the Giants and Atlanta, and they're just really screwed in terms of getting in the top 3 for one of those quarterbacks. But I do think if JJ McCarthy were to slide to late in the first round, where the cost is a lot cheaper to move up, and they have those 2 second-round picks, I could see that being a possibility with a team in the 20s that is willing to move down for 2 second-rounders, where they jump up and take a player like McCarthy, and then let them compete with Daniel Jones. And if it doesn't pan out, it's not the end of the world, because you still have a player who you took at 6th overall from this draft class to get you a lot better. And so I think that's probably the more feasible way they end up getting a quarterback in the first round of this draft.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I have trouble imagining that the Giants would be able to spend that sixth pick on a quarterback because, like you said, Walt, they don't have the roster where getting a quarterback upgrade is going to immediately raise their ceiling. Maybe it would be better. Maybe if they somehow got Jaden Daniels, he would be better equipped to deal with pressure than Jones has been, or maybe he would be better at avoiding turnovers. But I just don't see that being an option for them. I think, yeah, if one of the guys like McCarthy or Bo Nix or Michael Penix, who I hope the Giants don't draft because they will break him, I would think that they could potentially trade up into that pick 27 to 32 range because you get that key fifth year option. And, you buy yourself a year of saying, all right, we'll see if Daniel Jones is the answer. And we can kind of protect this guy on the bench and maybe throw him in at the end of the season as our offense kind of comes together better and our blocking works out a little bit better. But yeah, I don't see them landing one of the top three quarterbacks. I think they're more likely to either trade up into the end of the first round or go after someone like Spencer Rattler, who you can kind of take in the mid rounds and say, hey, let's see what this guy can become behind Daniel Jones. And if the answer is nothing, then so be it. You're sacrificing a mid-round pick for someone you tried to develop. So I think that's probably the best course of action for the Giants.
No, we had one last thing here. What is Fields' value in draft picks? Second round or third combination? I have a tough time kind of figuring out what compensation is right for which players because you tend to see like these trades where you're like, oh, why'd this team give that much for a player? And then the next trade will be like, wow, they got him for that. Like, I feel like it's pretty erratic. I definitely don't think it'll be a first rounder, but maybe a second and a third for a young quarterback. Now, the problem with Fields is that he's going to be due a big contract after the season. But I think a second and a third makes a lot of sense for Fields. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one to me because the contract is a big problem for who's ever taking him because you're going to have to pay him a big deal right away. And now the funny thing with Fields in the market now, I know there's a lot that teams aren't going to say if they really want him at this point because that would hurt them and leverage in the trade. But people mention Atlanta. Keep in mind that Terry Fontenot and their front office passed on Fields in 2021. So I'm a skeptic to think that Atlanta would go after him. The Raiders, I think if the Raiders had stuck with Champ Kelly, the interim GM, as their GM, I think that would have really increased the chances of them trading for him because Champ Kelly was part of the Bears' top scouting staff when they moved up to take Fields. But with Tom Telesco coming in, I'm really not convinced that Fields is kind of a Telesco type of quarterback. So I have some skepticism there as well. And I think in order for the Bears to really get a lot of value in picks, you need teams bidding against each other. And the longer it goes where Fields isn't traded, the value is going to decline. Just kind of remember Baker Mayfield with the Browns when after the Deshaun Watson signing happened, there's a lot of talk, well, he could go for day 2 pick or whatever. He ends up going for like a 5th round pick to Carolina because the market dried up. So the longer they hold on to Fields, the value will go down because other teams are going to fill the quarterback need through the draft and free agency and whatnot. So I think it's very fluid, as I guess giving you a long answer there. I think it's right now, the sooner they trade him, and like Ryan Poles was saying, they, for Fields' sake, they would want to do it sooner and have this resolved quickly. And I think that makes a lot of sense for them in terms of value. So if they're able to do something pretty soon, I think they could get maybe like a day 2 pick, like Walt said, like a 2nd round pick, and maybe like a conditional pick that could, rise or fall depending on the contract extension and things like then, other incentives that we see teams do. So I think it's really fluid right now, and it really depends on a market being there that's kind of cloaked in darkness at this time.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. My initial instinct was something along the lines of 2 third-round picks and one that might be conditional that it could become a second-round pick if uh, certain things are reached with the deal. So I think that is what makes most sense in my head. But again, as Charlie noted, if you're only dealing with a couple of teams that really want him, and they're probably not going to be willing to trade within the division to say the Vikings, if the Vikings don't retain Kirk Cousins and aren't really in love with the potential quarterback options they could get, yeah, the Bears could make the trade within the division. But if they like Fields enough, they might not be willing to do that. So I think they're probably looking at making a deal with the Steelers. And maybe the Steelers will just say, hey, we like the guy enough to give up this amount for him. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what he goes for. I ultimately think maybe a couple third round picks, maybe one with conditions attached to it, is kind of what I'm expecting at this point.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree with you guys. Like what Charlie said makes sense. Like waiting could hurt them. Kind of a diminishing value. It's almost like an option if you're trading. However, I think there's one condition where that would change, and it's something that the Eagles did ahead of the 2016 season when they drafted Carson Wentz and they had Sam Bradford on the roster, and Bradford was just rotting there for a while, and he was losing value until Minnesota lost us. Minnesota lost their quarterback and they had Sam Bradford. The Eagles traded Sam Bradford to the Vikings for a first round pick. So what the Bears could do, and this is very risky, they can just wait till training camp and preseason, and if someone's quarterback goes down for the year, a team may panic and trade a first round pick for them. So they won't get a pick this year. Obviously, they'll have to wait till 2025, but it could really pan out for them to wait. But like I said, it's a risk. I mean, if no quarterback goes down, then they won't have anywhere to trade Fields. So it's I don't know. It's a tough spot, but then again, I feel like the Bears are in a good position because they have a ton of cap space, they have a ton of draft capital, they have this great asset in Fields that they could trade. So I think just if the Bears are smart and play their cards correct, then they could be in a good position to make a run. I think this year, I think they can make a run deep into the playoffs this year. So yeah, that's it for our mock draft and the questions. Thanks so much for everyone for watching and commenting. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Charlie and Jacob, for joining us at this mock draft. It's always fun to do this. Can't wait for our next one, which will be sometime in April. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things change. But yeah, if you guys have anything to plug, Charlie and then Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here in Indianapolis, and as soon as we click off here, I'm going to be heading out to meet with scouts and other people from teams. So I'm here getting information. So keep checking back Walter Football all week. I'll have a lot of stuff inside information that I'm getting from team people going up on the site, and got a lot of good stuff coming up there. And of course, Walt will be logging all the combine results, and we'll have our mock drafts getting updated right away at the end of the combine or beginning of next week, and tons of other coverage coming, scouting reports, position rankings, all that stuff there on Walter Football.
Yeah, and as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Camenker. I will be posting some of my work from sportingnews.com over there, getting geared up for the combine this week, trying to break down which prospects will have the fastest 40, trying to work on some player comparisons, might do an article on why JJ McCarthy might be able to kind of light his draft stock on fire with a good combine, but he has to deliver on that end for that to happen. So I'll be watching all of the workouts as closely as possible on NFL Network. So hopefully we'll be getting tons of info from those. And as I continue to scout prospects, we'll post my thoughts on them there and over at sportingnews.com. So if you have any NFL questions, feel free to send them my way. If I see them, I'll answer them. And yeah, let's enjoy this draft process. It's always good when draft season gets here.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be back tomorrow. Kenny will not be on tomorrow. He's at a conference in I can't remember what city, Nashville. So I hope he's having fun down there. I think we're having a special guest on tomorrow. Not sure. It's not 100% locked in. If he doesn't make it, then I'll just be solo. Thursday, though, we'll have Tom on again, and we'll see if he's watched more Game of Thrones episodes as he goes through the good seasons of Game of Thrones. It's exciting to hear how he thinks of it, getting like a fresh perspective after we've seen the show ruin, unfortunately, at the end, but the first few seasons were great. So yeah, we were talking about Game of Thrones, and we talk about basically everything with Tom. It's always a lot of fun. And then Saturday we'll have Saturday the combine will be going on, so there'll not be a Saturday show, but yeah, we'll be back Wednesday and Thursday. Once again, thanks so much, guys, for commenting and watching. Really appreciate it. Please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video, visit the link in the description for the merch store. All that would help us out a lot. Charlie and Jacob, always a blast to do with you, this with you guys. Can't wait for next time. But yeah, I will talk to you guys later.
All right, sounds good.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye-bye.